Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means that it's time for a new How to Base. This one is actually going to be How to Base number 50. It means I've done 50 of these, which is pretty cool. I enjoy that. And so, in sort of honor of this 50th number, which is a big deal, I'm going to bring back what I think is one of my most important tutorials, which was How to Base 6. This is where I described the basic fundamentals of how FM synthesis worked. In that video, I used Citrus as my primary teaching tool. And in this video, I'm going to use FM8, which a lot of people have asked that I do since not everyone has FL or even has Citrus. But most people tend to have FM8 since it's a pretty popular FM synth. So we're gonna basically do the same thing as How to Base 6, but we're gonna do it using FM8. Plus a little bit of extra information that I've learned since then, since it has been a while, and I have learned things about why things happen and such like that, and I've also answered a couple questions I had about FM8 that I didn't really get. So let's do this. So FM synthesis, what does that mean? Well, the F in FM synthesis means frequency, and the M means modulation. So the whole word is frequency modulation synthesis. So the whole point here is that we're modulating frequency, or the pitch of a sound. And what does that look like? So here I have an FM8. This is just the default one that you get when you open it up. I'm going to put a note in, like here. It's kind of quiet. So I'm going to turn this up. I'm also going to turn up the velocity of op F. It's a little better. I guess while I'm at it, I'll just turn up the output. Yeah. Okay, so now the way that FM8 works is pretty similar to the way the Citrus works, in that we have this FM matrix. It's just presented a little bit differently from Citrus, but the end result is identical because this is how FM works. It's going to be the same through any synthesizer that has FM in it or is an FM synth, including the originals. So what we have here is we have different directions for how you can FM stuff. So with E and F, for example, F being the default one engaged, I'm gonna right click it to engage E, and now this means I'm gonna modulate F by E, F being the output operator and E being the modulation operator, or modulator and carrier, which is, if you've used vocoders at all, you might be familiar with that sort of relationship. I could also modulate E by F, which is by this direction. And then this third position is feedback modulation, which has its place. It's not something I tend to do a lot, but it's there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to modulate F by E while it's playing. Yay, we made a sound. So the basic principle of FM is pretty easy to grasp, but it might not be that obvious when we're working with such high-speed operators. And what do I mean by high-speed operators? Well, we're basically, when I say that we're modulating the frequency of an operator, you might have had an image of your mind of basically that one of these operators is like an LFO. It's an automation output that's just moving the pitch up and down really fast, and that's somewhat accurate. The thing is, though, is that an LFO is called an LFO for a reason, and it's called a low-frequency oscillator. That's because when we hit a note, even a bass note like that, the speed at which the audio is oscillating, the hertz, the speed of the sound, is way faster than pretty much any LFO is ever going to be. And this has something to do with especially the digital world, has interesting, subtle sort of programming tricks that allow the software to do that, to actually modulate something that fast, and it has to do with slope interpolation, and not necessarily that it's actually being a controller. So let's actually demonstrate what is even happening. So what I'm going to do is these are all set to ratio 1, which is already a big difference from Citrus, because Citrus is by default, everything is ratio 2. So that we're on ratio 1, which means that it's going to be 1-to-1 with the note's frequency value. So like if I hit a 440, that means that it would oscillate whatever operator you're putting it into at 440 hertz. So we're like at E3, it's not as fast as that, but I'm going to actually bring down the speed, the ratio of E, which is going to bring down the speed of the oscillation. And I have a handy dandy EQ open here, and we're going to look at what happens when I do that. So right there, that's the most basic demonstration of what FM synthesis does. It's very plainly illustrated, whereas by default, this is the sound. And then now we can FM it. And we do that really fast, and you get new timbres. Running joke has run. And it's all well and good. So that's a pretty easy concept to grasp. Now, you probably, like, the reason why I use FM synthesis is to make a pretty commonly recognized vowel-y, gravel-based sound. It's what I do with it. And that's like where I start when I do an FM kind of sound. You can do other things. FM is a very diverse and versatile palette that you can work with to make very interesting sounds. But I focus on the bass aspects because that's what I do, and because this show is called How to Bass. So what ends up happening is if we look at the EQ again when I bring up the FM amount from E to F by hitting play. So you kind of get a very loose sort of vowel sound, and that is the result of the activity that we get from how fast the oscillators are moving. Again, if I move it up from the low speed to high speed, you can kind of see it growing in its range. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add in a high harmonic. And there's a couple ways we can do this. The most direct way is to engage a third operator. I'm going to do D and route it into E. The way that I usually do it in Citrus is I would route it straight into F, and then I would modulate the volume amount of both of them at once. And you can actually do that in FM8, but just for sake of ease for right now, we're going to go into E. So also in Citrus, when I make a high harmonic, I usually make it at ratio 64. And that's because that the bass operator the fundamental tone is going to be at a ratio 2. So at ratio 1, that means we're going to do half. So that means that D is going to be at 32 and not 64. Incidentally, I think 32. Nope, 64 is the highest, so 32 it is. I also like how you can actually enter in the values in FM8. It's kind of cool. All right, so now I'm gonna hit play. I'm gonna break everyone's ears because I modulated the wrong operator. There we go. Now all of a sudden we have a kind of a vowel thing going on. Bring it back down. So why does that happen? Well, because we have the higher harmonic, if I actually turned off E and just had D on going into F, you can kind of see how it kind of just hangs out up there. And the distance in between, you can kind of see how there's two poles going on in the that spread is actually the result of the fundamental tone itself. And then if I were if I introduce E to that, or introduce it into E, then what ends up happening is that area, actually I'll just bring up like so. So you can see it right there. That's the area. And it spreads. So not only is it spreading the fundamental tone, which is what this is, it's also spreading the high harmonic. And that EQ behavior of opening and closing the areas of that particular area of the spectrum creates the sort of vowel-y sound. I mean, if you ever looked at a vowel EQ or done your own EQ animations to replicate the vowel positions, that should look pretty familiar to you. So that's what that's going on. Now, in the last tutorial, in how to bass number 6, that was a while ago, this is when I'd switch to doing triangles instead of sine waves. I'm also going to turn the velocity of E up. Suddenly it's much sharper and clearer, and one must wonder why. And this has to do with a very unique behavior that ends up happening when a triangle wave is substituted for a sine wave. So I'm going to do what we did before. I'm going to slow it down and watch what happens. Kind of hard to see because the note was so low. Let's bring it back up. So this is what I was talking about with the idea that an operator modulating another operator is just like a sort of LFO relationship with the sound. And that's because when you look at what what the sine wave does, that makes sense. But then when you look at what a triangle does, that's behavior that you probably think a square wave would do. And in fact, a square wave does something entirely different. And also is what different from what a square wave would do in citrus, and also what a saw wave would do. Saw wave. And that's because the smoothing algorithms inside FM8 are different from what they are inside citrus. So the behavior is a bit different between the ones that have sharp edges, which is unfortunate because this means that unless there's a way to change that, which I don't think there is because I've looked and can't see any, you're not going to be able to do cool things like the oscillator sync trick that Nucleon on the ImageLine forums taught me. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I believe it's How to Base 10 that I talk about the oscillator sync trick. And that has to do with using a saw wave because in citrus, the saw wave has and the square wave have extremely sharp ends to them. However, the point here is that the triangle is behaving, the shape of what's happening in the sound will look a lot like a square wave, but it's a triangle. And why is that? Well, I didn't actually know why in How to Base 6, but it was pointed out to me numerous times by people in YouTube comments that the shape of the waveform is not what their controller data is coming from. It's actually the slope of the waveform. What does that mean? Well, if you look at a sine wave, what it's actually measuring is the change in slope, not just a slope. So, and if you look at from the 0 point to the top point, it's positive, but it's changing slope the whole time. And then if you go down from top to all the way to negative top, it's changing slowly and changing back. So that means that the pitch movement is going to slowly change back and forth. But if we go to a triangle wave, you see that the slope is constant, and then it's negative constant, and then it's constant. So that means it's going to be value, and then other value immediately. And that's why that happens. And so when we have this behavior, and not the sine wave behavior, this means that we don't have any kind of intermediary movement, and it makes the sound end up sharper because it's only going to be the top and bottom values of its own movement. And then of course the harmonic content created by the movement itself, which is what a lot of this is based on. Okay, that right there, how it's different every time you play a note. This is FM8 trying to replicate what an analog device would do, in that it would not be perfect. You can disable this by turning on key sync for every oscillator that you're using. But I mean, if I were doing this, I would turn it on for every oscillator all the time, because I absolutely cannot abide by it not being perfect constantly, because I live in a digital world. That's what I do. So that's what that means. So then we could bring in the third oscillator again. So now we basically covered everything that I talked about in the original How to Base 6. I also brought up how a fun thing you can do is to modulate the third harmonic when it's by itself by a fourth fundamental. This is very interesting to watch, the EQ curve as you mess with this sort of stuff. That's a lot of fun, and you can do that in FM8. Pretty much everything that you can do in terms of FM routing in FM8, you can do that I did in Citrus, you can do in FM8. There are some things that FM8 can do that Citrus can't do, and there are things that Citrus can do that FM8 can't do. It's my personal opinion that Citrus is a better FM synth. However, Citrus doesn't have all these crazy effects built in and this morphing business, which I don't even know what that's about. Be honest. So if you're using FM8, how do you modulate these things? Well, there has a mod wheel here, and what you can do is that in every operator, you get this little section here where you can control the amplitude modification, amp mod right there. And if you just say, I want all the mods, this means that like now the mod wheel is going to control the amplitude of this is E, yeah. So. And also by default, there's a pitch LFO that's being routed to the mod wheel, which I will get rid of. The only bummer about like from here, because that is pretty much the exact same sound that I would have made using Citrus. The only bummer being is that once you actually try to automate anything in FM8, we get smoothing issues. See, browse parameters, modulation wheel, create automation clip. See, watch how these guys, these first three hills here will sound fine, but the last one, that's not very sharp. Does not. And in Citrus, you have there's by default there's smoothing engaged, but you can turn the smoothing off, and I don't know how to do that in FM8. However, I do note that I'm controlling the mod wheel right now, but you don't necessarily need to do that. You can what you can do is that since I've routed D into E, this means that E is the one that's creating all of the FM for the output operator, which is F. So this means that if I control this here, then it will do the job. So let's see, I'm gonna tools, last tweaked, E out level, create automation clip. Now, I believe this will be less smooth. It's probably still gonna have some smoothing, but it'll be a little bit better than if I had just done the mod wheel, which is all the way off now. And will continue to be off because it's being automated to its original position, which is off. Here. Now it's on all the time. Yeah. So it's still a little bit smooth, but it's a little bit sharper than what the modulation wheel was. If you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of it not being sharp enough, let's look at what the same sound will look like in Citrus. So see now, see we're all operator, we're all on ratio 2. So triangle wave on, triangle wave 64. Just for kicks, let's do the same configuration that we have in FM8. That means we're controlling the volume of this guy. So volume mod X. And then I did it too high. See, there's a smooth icon. Doot, doot, doot. That should have taken so long. So now I'm going to make a pattern where things should be sharp. And we'll see what it does. Wow, that's really not sharp. So then we go disable smooth. That's completely sharp. And that's what I want. Citrus is also much louder, just because all the outputs are just all maxed by default, whereas FM8 is very careful and subtle about its output volumes. So just be aware of that when you have differences in your sound from things that happen in Citrus versus things that happen in FM8. So yes, the point of this video was to illustrate that between any FM synthesizer, the basic theory of FM synthesis as a whole is all the same. As long as you know that, you can use anything that has FM in it, and you'll understand how it works. Like Massive has its modulation oscillator built in, and that is FM. Like the phase targeting on an oscillator is an FM. That's what that'll do the same thing. If you turn it down really low, you'll start to notice that it's just a pitch movement, and it's fine. You could use Toxic Biohazard, which is another FM synth. You could use Zebra, which I believe has an FM module involved, and it's all going to be the same thing. The only difference is just how it's wrapped. And FM8 wraps it in a weird retro kind of confusing looking interface. I mean, that's just me because I'm used to Citrus, which wraps it in a very FL looking interface kind of deal. It also has a ring modulation matrix, which is a pretty decent addition. But yeah. So I hope that this had helped you understand FM more if you couldn't get it with using Citrus as a model. But now I've demonstrated how the basics work in FM8, and hopefully you'll have a better time making dim basses. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to answer them. And as usual, have a nice day.